Hi guys and welcome back to our channel. In this video, we are going to talk about the form IMM 5532, which is the Relationship Evaluation Questionnaire. The videos that we have made in the past have been for the forms which are either meant for the principal applicant to fill in, like IM 0008, or for the sponsors to fill in, which is IM 1344. In none of those forms, there are any questions which asks about your relationship story, like how did you guys meet, in what circumstances did you meet, since how long you have been knowing each other, or who are the people who know about your relationship. Like, all these questions are not there in any of those forms. So this is the reason why IMM 5532 becomes one of the most crucial form in the entire spousal sponsorship application. So we have to make sure that we are using this form to prove the genuineness of our relationship and support the entire application. So in this video, we are going to go step by step on how to fill the form right, which are the sections that is very important for you to make note of, and then finally when you are going to sign the form, how are you going to do it in the system. Before we begin, I'm making an assumption that you have already downloaded the form IMM 5532 and it is live in your system. If you have not downloaded it yet, or you do not know what is the steps that you need to follow to download that form, you can watch this video and it will take you through a step-by-step guide on how to and from where to download these forms. This will help us to focus on the content for which we are here. I have already pre-filled a form. Now, this form is going to be based on a fictitious character in which there is a principal applicant and there is a sponsor and there is a story behind it. This form has got three sections: Part A for the sponsor, Part B for the principal applicant, and Part C for both principal applicant and the sponsor. So as I said, I have already pre-filled this form and I have opened it up in a Mozilla Firefox browser on a Mac machine. Why I'm not using an Adobe Acrobat reader is something that we are going to answer on the section of the digital signature. So let's park that for now. So the first statement of the form itself is one of the very important and crucial one. It says, if you need more space for any of the questions, use another sheet and write the part and the question number. This is one of the areas where I have got a lot of questions on my Instagram and also on this YouTube channel, that how we are going to make use of this extra sheet of paper. So we'll talk about that as well as we come to that part. But for now, the first question is personal information about the sponsor. So in this case, I'm using a fictitious character called Ronald Weasley, who is the sponsor. There's a date of birth, the client ID, if you know it. There are people who have been asking that, hey, I do not have the client ID. What if the form gets rejected? That's not going to happen. If you do not have the client ID, just pass it. In fact, write not applicable in your case and then move on. Same, it goes for the personal information about the principal applicant. In this case, it's Hermione Granger. So Ronald is the sponsor, married to Hermione, married or maybe living together with a common law partner. Either of these cases is true. Then the date of birth and then client ID. Pretty straightforward, not spending a lot of time here. This brings us to part A, which is sponsorship evaluation. That is, all the questions in this particular section is for the sponsors to fill in. So let's start with the first question. Sponsor's employment history. The instruction very clearly says, starting with your current employer, if applicable, give details of all the employers you have worked for the past 5 years and leave no gaps. So if you're filling up this form in December 2022, you have to go full 5 years back and start from December 2017. We'll talk about what are the different scenarios and circumstances that you have to handle in this particular section. So let's take the first scenario. In this case, Ronald Weasley, who is the sponsor, has been working for a company called DigiKey Technologies in Canada, and that is the place of current employment. Now, since it is an ongoing job, what we are supposed to do in the place of to? So there are two options that you have. Either you can write NA, which is not applicable in the to field, which indicates that the to field is still not applicable because it's an ongoing job, or you can write ongoing job here in the braces as well. So either of these options should work. And then you continue to provide your position, the salary. The next scenario is, how do you highlight your gap in your employment? In this case, you can see that Ronald has been working for DigiKey Technologies and he has also worked for Arrowhead Systems prior to that. He has worked for SEBI in Bangalore, India prior to that. And then there was a gap for almost 2 or 3 months in 2017 November to 2018 of January. Since there was a gap there, he simply wrote unemployed and there is no position, obviously there is no salary, not applicable. This is one case wherein there is a gap in which Ronald did not work at all. If you have worked on, let's say, a contractual job, or if you have worked for a family business, you can highlight that information as well. So you did not say that you were unemployed, but you are going to say that I worked for a family business. So even that is fine. In this case, the employment gap can be highlighted like this. But make sure that the gap, if it is falling within the period of past 5 years, has to be disclosed. If the gap is like beyond December or beyond January 2017, considering 5 years from today, December 2022, in that case it's okay to leave that out. But if it is falling within the past 5 years, you have to disclose it in this manner. So the third scenario is, what if you have worked in multiple countries? Even in that case, if it is falling within the past 5 years of time bracket, you have to disclose that information. So in this case, Ronald is working in Mississauga, that's the current job. But prior to that, he has worked in UK, he has worked in India, then there was a period of unemployment, and then there was one more employment in India. So as the instruction clearly says, you have to just disclose the information from past 5 years, irrespective of whichever place you have worked for. The fourth scenario that can be applicable in your case, and this is something that I have recently received as a question in the Instagram, is what if I have worked multiple jobs in the same time frame? So how do I disclose the employer information, and also how do I declare my gross income? So let's assume since June of 2019 until March of 2021, Ronald has worked for multiple employers. In this case, what I would propose to do is either write like multiple jobs and then write the name of the employer, employer X, employer Y, employer Z. Just an example that I have worked for 3 different places. And then I'm going to give multiple positions, and then I'm going to write a consolidated or an average value of the gross income that I made. So let's say I made $7,000 or $5,000 as a gross value. In that case, I will disclose it like this. Along with that, I would recommend you provide a letter of explanation that gives a breakdown of the name and the contact information of all those employers and what was the salary that you made from each of those employers. To give an example of how you would draft a letter of explanation to give a breakdown of the multiple jobs that you had in part of your employment, you're going to provide the details something like this. Create a Word file. In the header section, provide the name of the principal applicant and the sponsor and their respective date of birth. In the title, write the letter of explanation, the date when it is drafted, address it to the immigration officer, and give a reference of in which form this particular letter of explanation is going to be attached to. So in this case, it's IMM 5532, sponsor and principal application forms. It is relevant for part A, and there is also a specific question, so you can just simply write question number 1, for example. I have provided this sample as a template that you can use for writing your own letter of explanation for various different sections. You will find this as a link in the description section of this video. So here you have, dear sir, madam, in context of the current application, I wish to explain part of my employment history wherein I worked from 2019 June to 2019 March at multiple employers. Below is the breakdown of the information of the employers I worked during the same time frame. Then you can create a table, give the employer name, the contact information, the name of the person. You can also provide the address of the employer, the monthly gross income during that same time frame. Then you need to provide a signature, which is typically the section is relevant and the question is relevant for the sponsor. But since the application is going to be signed by both the sponsor and the principal applicant towards the end, that is something that we will cover in this section C, it is best that you provide signature of both these parties. I personally would recommend to provide a hand-drawn signature to this particular letter of explanation and then attach it by giving an appropriate name. So you can name it as IMM 5532 letter of explanation part A question 1 and then attach it as an additional document in the online portal. Moving to the next question, have you sponsored in the past or are you currently sponsoring any other family member in a different application? In our case, this question was not relevant, so we selected no and then we wrote NA for rest of the fields. But if you are doing a sponsorship for a family member, maybe let's say you're doing it for your parents or for your grandparents, or you have already done it in the past, or they are already permanent residents now, then in that case you will have to disclose that information of that family member in here. Or if you have not sponsored someone in the past but then you have been a co-signer in some application, then in that case you have to disclose that information here as well. The next question is, give details of any person who is financially dependent on you. It can be person from your current relationship or from your past relationship, and that can most likely be your spouse or your children. In that case, you will have to first understand who exactly is defined as a dependent in the entire IRCC application process. Now, where do you find the definition of a dependent? If you refer the complete guide IMM 5289, I have provided a link in the description box below. You will find a table of contents, and within that, you will have an appendix A called key definitions. If you click on that, it will redirect you to this part wherein you will have definition of all the key terms, and here's where it defines who a dependent children is, and then even in here, what does an accompanying dependent mean? So these terms you will have to understand first, and only then you will be able to answer that question. Now, if you go back to the form, in our case, we did not have any financial dependent people for us. So neither for my wife, neither for me. So So we ended up writing not applicable in rest of the fields. The next question is level of education, which is for the sponsor. So as a sponsor, I have done my schooling, my high school, my engineering, and also my masters. So in my case, all the 4 checkboxes were relevant. So I did primary school 10 years, high school, which is 11th and the 12th, 2 years, college, university, engineering 4 years, and postgraduate studies 2 years. So that's the detail about here. Now, this is not going to be something that is going to be backed up by any kind of supporting document, at least for the sponsor, but it is still required for you to provide that information. The next question is list all addresses where you have lived in the past 5 years. Now, where you as in the sponsor. We are going to start with the current address, that is the address where as a sponsor I have lived. In this case, Ronald is living in King's Landing, City, London in Ontario. And since it is a current address and there is no to date, you have 2 options. You can write not applicable, which is what we did when we were submitting our application. And we have also seen that people are writing the date when they're sending the application. So for example, if you are sending this application by, let's say, tentatively by 10th of January 2023, then you are going to provide 10th of Jan 2023. But what I would recommend is writing not applicable still makes more sense because it is indeed not applicable and you do not have a date when you are going to stop living there. So once you have provided your current address, you have to go back in time until past 5 years and then list down all the addresses in the reverse chronological order. Make sure that there are no gaps. Now, if you have stayed at one place, but during the stay, you have to travel to a different location for certain sort of duration. Even in that case, you have to provide that permanent location as the address where you have stayed. For example, Ronald has stayed in Whitby, Ontario, Canada from January 2021 to December 2021. While he was staying in Whitby, he had to travel to 6 different occasions on 6 different places within the country and outside the country. If that is the case, since Ronald still had this Whitby location as the place where he was having a contractual, let's say, a rent, or he was owning the property, he is still providing the address of Whitby. He is not providing the 6 addresses where he has stayed for a shorter duration. However, Ronald still needs to disclose the travel that he has done outside of the country in this travel form, which is IMM 5562. If your application package suggests that you have to fill up the form IMM 5562, which is the supplementary travel information, I have already created a detailed video around that topic. You can find it in the cards above or in the description box below. So as you can see, you only have 5 placeholders to enter the address information. But what if you have more than 5 lines? In that case, you will have to use an additional Word file or an additional attachment and then provide the additional addresses information in that sheet. How do you write that is what we will show now. So I have renamed the file as IMM5532, additional information, and then you are also going to provide the name of the sponsor. In the header section, write down the name of the applicant, like the principal applicant, Hermione Granger. You can also, for example, enter the name of the sponsor as well if needed. The date when the form is being filled, additional sheet. The reference is IMM 5532, sponsor and principal application forms. Under the part A, sponsorship evaluation and information about the sponsor. 5th question, address history. These are the 2 remaining addresses that you are going to disclose. So there is one place where Ronald has stayed in Bangalore, one place in Ahmedabad. This is over and above the 5 places which is already listed on the original form. Once this is done, Ronald, who is the sponsor, is going to manually sign the form, and then Hermione Granger can also provide her signature. It's not said anywhere that you have to provide, but now since the form IMM 5532 has to be signed by both the people, that's the sponsor and the principal applicant, that's the reason I believe that both their signatures has to be also provided on this additional sheet of paper. In fact, this is how you can create an additional sheet throughout the entire application package. So in case of, let's say, address history, you want to share the name of the relatives, which is one of the questions that will come later. You can add the relative's name in here and then provide the data in that similar table, right? And the table structure can be exactly the same how it is in the form. So here you have dates, street number, city, town, province, postal code, country, exactly the same format you can provide in here, and then the details, right? Once this is done, I hope this information is helpful to process my application and the signatures of both the parties. Having done the address question, let's move to the next one, which is residence in Canada. It's pretty straightforward. If you are submitting an outline application and if you are a permanent resident, you have to select yes. If you're not in the country, you have to come back in the country and then apply the application. But if you are a Canadian citizen and you are still living outside the country, then you have to provide the details of when did you leave Canada, what are the plans to come back to Canada, all that stuff. In our case, it was applicable, so I just selected yes, I live in Canada, and since it was yes, there was no further questions required. Next, we move to the relationship history. Have you ever been married or in a common law relationship with another person? Make sure that the response that you provide in this question matches to the response that you provide in IMM 5533 under the previous relationship section. If you had a previous relationship, you have to submit the proof that previous relationship no longer exists. It could be for multiple reasons. So if there is a divorce, you have to provide a divorce certificate. If it was a death of the previous spouse, you have to provide a death certificate. Or if there was a common law relationship which was like no longer, then you have to provide a proof of separation. So the information in both these places have to tally in IMM 5532 and IMM 5533. The next question for the sponsor to respond is the consent to disclose. So if there is an investigation into the marriage fraud about you, do you consent to allow IRCC to share that result of the investigation with the spouse or your partner? You select yes or no. Obviously, I selected yes because there is no need for any kind of fear. So once that is done, then you move to the last section, which is like declaration of the sponsor. Here you have to sign. This brings me to the point on why I'm using Mozilla Firefox to fill this form. The reason is this. If I open this form in Adobe Acrobat Reader and try to fill this information, all of the information can be filled in. But the moment I try to write anything in the signature section to provide my digital signature, system does not allow me to do that. However, if I do it in the Mozilla Firefox browser, it still allows me to write my name. So in this case, the sponsor's name is Ronald Weasley. That's how you're going to provide the digital signature and provide the date when you are submitting this form. So this is how you're going to provide your digital signature for this particular section in the form. So this brings us to the end of section A. The next section is for the principal applicant to fill in. But before we start there, I'm going to turn on the lights, grab something to eat because it's getting very dark, and then we'll continue from there on. Alright, so now we move to part B, which is information about the principal applicant. There are not a lot of questions in this section, so we'll try to finish this up quickly and then we'll jump to the critical one, which is part C. Part C is going to be another video, which is continuation of this video. If I have uploaded that video, you will find it in the description box below or you will find it in the cards above. So the first question is, before this relationship, was your sponsor related to you in any way? There are examples given like was the sponsor directly related to you or the sponsor was related to your family member. So there is an extended relation that applies in your case. In that case, you are going to select yes and then provide what that relationship is and how are they connected. So how is the principal applicant related to the sponsor? For instance, there are a lot of communities in the Indian subcontinent, at least that I know of, in which there are arranged marriages, and in that arranged marriages, it is very likely that the guy and the girl were known to each other due to some extended relationship. In such situations, you are going to provide the information about the family member through which you were related to each other. So you provide the family name, the given name of the individuals, the date of birth of that individual through which you were connected, and the relationship, like the relationship can be with the principal applicant or it can be with the sponsor. Either of these cases, since it is a mutual individual who knows both of you, is going to be listed down here. Moving to the next question, do you have any relatives? It could be aunts, uncle, cousins living in Canada. If yes, give their full name, addresses and the relationship to you. In our case, we did not have a lot of relatives, but there were a few people who we know that they are very distantly related to us, but we never had any contact with them, nor our parents had the contact with them. So we decided not to list them because it will unnecessarily ask for the information about the date of birth, the place of birth, and we do not know any of that. So we ended up writing not applicable. If you have any close aunts, cousins living in Canada, you may want to add their name. I would like to give a tip here. If any of these individuals, the one that you are listing down here, were part of your marriage ceremony back in the place where you are from, or they know about your relationship, and if any of these individuals can write a relationship supporting document for you guys, then you may definitely want to include their names in here. And once you provide this name, give a reference in the proof of relationship documents that's in IMM 5533 form. In our case, we simply wrote not applicable in the fields and then we move to the next. The next question is, have you ever been married or in a common law relationship with another person? The way you respond to this question is exactly how the sponsor would respond to the same question that is in part A. So in here, the principal applicant, if there are any past relationships which ended up in divorce, separation or death of the previous partner, then you are going to list that information in here. Make sure that you're able to provide justification to this particular section in form of proof of certificate of separation or certificate of divorce or a death certificate if relevant. The next question is consent to disclose. If there is an investigation into a marriage fraud about you, do you consent IRCC to provide the information and share the results with your partner or the spouse? In this case, it's the sponsor. We selected yes. I really do not know why you would select no, but select yes. The next and the final question in this section is declaration of the applicant. And here, since we are entering this particular form in MacBook, I'm entering the information in the Mozilla Firefox browser. I'm just going to write the name of the applicant as Hermione Granger. Enter the date as 2022-04. This brings us to the third and the final part of the form, which is information about your relationship. It is going to be a separate video. If the video is already out there, you will find the link in the description box below or in the card above. I know that we have not completed the form yet, but if you found this video to be helpful, in order to show your appreciation and support to the channel, please do not forget to give a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. Until we meet next time, take care. Bye bye.